Yeah, talk to us a bit about how those intramuscular triglycerides start to impact the story around, what substrates we're going to utilize during exercise.
Yeah, so before I jump into intramuscular triglycerides, if we link back to some of those key energy sensing proteins,
Hmm.
and these were some of the things that we measured in our muscle samples from the training study. So we know that AMPK and PGC1 alpha, some of those key ones I talked about earlier, they're nutrient sensitive, and they're involved in different adaptations, so mitochondrial adaptations, proteins involved in glucose or sugar transport into muscles, such as GLUT4, which is that main glucose transport protein. And in our study, we observed greater increases in the protein levels of AMPK and PGC1 alpha in muscle with exercise before versus after breakfast. So skeletal muscle AMPK, it can be activated by high fatty acid availability, as well as muscle glycogen availability. So some of the work that came before our study had shown quite nicely that when you exercise with low muscle glycogen, you can increase the responses of some of these proteins such as AMPK. So as I mentioned, our exercise training study was conducted in collaboration with researchers, including Dr. Gareth Wallace, and we looked at muscle glycogen as well as intramuscular triglyceride use with a single bout of fasted fed exercise. And we didn't observe any difference in muscle glycogen utilization with exercise before versus after breakfast. So we think the
Interesting.
increases in GLUT4 will probably be coming from increases in fatty acid availability and oxidation, leading to increases in skeletal muscle AMPK. We also looked at the phospholipid composition of skeletal muscles. These are, and this was done with researchers in Poland. It's the fatty acid composition of muscle membranes, and this has been important for health and insulin sensitivity. Um, and we showed greater remodeling or beneficial remodeling of this membrane with exercise before breakfast. And then you mentioned as well about IMTG, and there's a nice body of evidence that's gone before us that suggests that turnover of fat stores might be beneficial for health. So that's the turnover of fat stores from our fat tissue, but also regular utilization of the fat stored in muscle, so intramuscular triglycerides, and this has been associated with improved insulin sensitivity. And in our study, because we collaborated with those researchers at the University of Birmingham, we were able to show that eating breakfast before versus after breakfast, exercise, sorry, say doing your exercise in the fasted state, you get increased intramuscular triglyceride utilization in type 1 and type 2 fibers of these overweight men. So overall, the mechanisms seem to point towards increased fat use with exercise in the fasted state being important for these changes in the health of muscle. Key proteins such as AMPK and GLUT4 being upregulated, changes to the fat composition of muscle membranes, and as you mentioned there, an increased turnover of the fat stores themselves. And a really nice element of our study was that we measured expired air samples during every single exercise training study session. So we collected something called Douglas bags, and we looked at the composition of those bags, and we were able to work out energy expenditure and carbohydrate and fat use during every single session. And what we found is there was a correlation between the men who burned the most fat during the exercise training sessions and the change in our estimate of insulin sensitivity. So it again supports
Tremendous.
that idea that, yeah, that there's still a lot more mechanistic work to be done. It's a really exciting area, but the evidence from our study certainly points towards the burning more fat during exercise may hold the benefit to unlocking some of these health benefits.
Well, it's such compelling work when we think about the amount of people who pursue, endurance goals for better health, running a half marathon, running a marathon, and unfortunately, the amount of people who, despite ramping up their exercise expenditure tremendously, don't lose all that much weight over the course of their 2, 3, 4, 5 months of preparation. And this is where the fueling strategies become so important, and to be able to see that, particularly if they need to be doing more aerobic work and spending 80% of their time with truly aerobic sessions, you know, being able to do that first thing in the morning, without having to, have any fuel on board is not only convenient, but as you're alluding to with all your, and you've proven in your research, is a great way to start improving that metabolic profile.
Yeah, and um, although some of the research we've been doing is quite new in terms of looking at this for health, and it's important to acknowledge there's been a lot of great research already done in this area. Louise Burke, John Hawley have done
Mm-hmm.
work, Catherine de Bock, I mentioned Karen Van Proyen's study,
Mm-hmm.
James Morton, they've all done great work in this area, and um, typically looking at this from kind of adaptations to exercise, typically with higher exercise volumes, often with a performance outcome,
Yes,
rather than looking at it from health. So there was a lot of nice work, and some of those studies also point to that there might be some enhanced adaptations to performing exercise in the fasted state. Looking at proteins such as AMPK, some of the mitochondrial proteins being upregulated. Whether that always translates into increases in performance, the evidence is a little more unclear. We definitely see some enhanced adaptations. Doesn't always translate into improved performance, which is another thing to acknowledge here. Is that you need that complete picture. You need the adaptations and then the final outcome. But
absolutely.
I,
Yeah, on the performance end, obviously that, yeah, that training nutrition, and as you mentioned before, sort of what the demands are of the session, and being able to then strategize and plan what type of fueling strategy you want to take on board to really get
yeah,
the result that you're looking for.
yeah, and it's something again I think we should reiterate here. And my background is definitely more on the health side of things, but from performance, obviously I'm interested in that element as well. And increasingly, when you talk to the guys that are involved with elite athletes, we're not talking about always training in the fasted state or always training with carbohydrate, but instead I think it's thinking about, well, what do I need to fuel this exercise session? Is this going to be a long exercise session where I need to be thinking about carbohydrate, or is this an easy, moderate intensity ride where perhaps I don't need to take on as much fuel because I can increase some of these adaptations from performing the session fasted? And again, also thinking about energy balance. So you need to be thinking about this holistic picture rather than black and white, always perform exercise in the fasted state. I think there's definitely a time and place to it, and this kind of moderate intensity running cycling is again where we're talking about with this.
Real sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And Rob, if we look at sort of the evolution of research in this area, what are some areas that you think in the next 5 or 10 years will be, on the cutting edge, or areas that we might find some more gains?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting area to be involved in, and kind of we hinted at the start, like we're very good at looking at exercise, especially when it comes to health. We're very good at looking at nutrition, but these interactions are so exciting, and I think it could help us, like we said, get the bigger bang for a buck, which in today's climate, I think we're um, is where it is. And in terms of next steps, so for various reasons, we conducted our research in men. I think there's some work that needs to be done to repeat that in women. I think we talked about when we were talking about the adaptations that we think it's to do with increased fat burning. And what I would say is that the sex really you get the same effect
Mm-hmm.
where men or women perform the exercise in a fasted or a carbohydrate fed state, you'll get increased fat burning irrespective of sex. But it's one very easy question that could be answered. I think then we can start getting into some of the nuances, like is there a minimal number of sessions that need to be performed fasted? What about changing the meal composition? If you say you really want to perform some exercise fasted, but your job doesn't allow you to exercise in the morning, perhaps you could skip lunch or have a low carbohydrate lunch and perform your exercise before dinner. So you're still performing your exercise in a without having a large dose of carbohydrate beforehand. So lots of questions to be asked around there, and I know there's also some really nice research going on around the timing of exercise throughout the day. So Brendan Gabriel and Julian Zareth are doing some nice work around timing of exercise across the day, and I think that's also kind of an exciting area to tap into now.